In Argentina, a coup 50 years ago this week ushered in a brutal military dictatorship.
It's still very much there and in the center of what Argentina society tells itself about its past.
I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Today, that anniversary inspires remembrance and denial. Also, the internet is still down in Iran, but some people found workarounds in previous blackouts.
People who had access to satellite networks were getting outside information, but many ordinary citizens had doubts.
And government workers in Kenya can take 2 days menstrual leave per month. No questions asked.
It's recognizing that menstruation is a real health experience.
But stigma still needs to be addressed for people to benefit from the law.
All that and more today on The World.
This is The World. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Thank you for being here this Monday. The big headline today is what looks like an about face as President Trump says he wants to make a deal with Iran. The president has claimed that his envoys are in talks with an Iranian leader, and that is why he says he is not bombing Iran's power plants today as he'd threatened to do. Instead, he's giving Iran 5 more days to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and free up the world's oil supply.
Iranian state television's take on that: no such talks are underway, and that Trump is simply backing down in response to a, quote, firm warning from Iran. Meanwhile, fighting rages on throughout the region.
And the internet remains blocked in Iran, as it's been since the beginning of this war. We'll take a close look at how Iranians are coping with that internet blackout and working around it later in the show.
Right now, though, to Argentina, where people are about to mark a grim anniversary, 50 years since the 1976 military coup. Days after that overthrow, General Jorge Videla spoke to the nation to announce the new regime. Under the guise of fighting corruption and international communism, they had taken power. For the next 7 years, the military government targeted political opponents and innocent civilians, leaving thousands dead or disappeared. Today, President Javier Milei is stirring debate over how the dictatorship is remembered. This afternoon, I spoke with journalist Natalio Cosoy in Buenos Aires, who told me that the memory of the dictatorship is still very much alive in Argentina.
There are going to be plenty of demonstrations in the country, but the central one is going to be in Buenos Aires. And the 24th is a public holiday, and the 23rd has also been declared a public holiday. One would expect that the demonstration would be quite big.
Yes, so how will Argentines actually mark this terrible period in those demonstrations? What will be the mood?
On the one hand, the mood is always grim because it's a remembrance of those who are gone and had to go through torture, kidnap, unfair imprisonment, and disappearance. But on the other hand, if the demonstration is big enough, I think there's also going to be a sign of relief that the narrative that's being pushed against this idea of memory, of justice, that's been held for so long, particularly by human rights organizations in Argentina, if it's big enough, that's going to be a relief. I'm mentioning this because you mentioned what's going on with Javier Milei's government that's somehow pushing a resistant view of what's happened with the argument of full history or full memory, try to push the idea that the responsibility of what's happening is not mainly with the military of the time, but also with armed guerrilla groups that were operating in the country before the coup.
I'm going to get to that in a second, Natalia, so I'm glad you brought that up. For listeners who might not know this history, remind us what happened on March 24th, 1976, and why this anniversary is still so important for Argentines today.
At the time, the military took power with the argument of trying to combat guerrilla groups and also bring the country back to order. The generals called the process the process of national reorganizations.
But in the aftermath of that coup came some of the darkest years in Argentina's recent history. There were people disappeared, political prisoners tortured, the so-called death flights. I mean, really sadistic stuff.
The scale of the repression was something that no one expected. I mean, people did expect a coup to take place because they were used to that and they were tired of the previous government, but they never expected that the military junta would become so violent and so vile. And you have to remember, many people were in favor of the coup. So I think there's also a certain amount of guilt in society of those who supported the coup at the time and then realized what had taken place.
Natalio, some have held up Argentina as a model for prosecuting abuses that happened during a dictatorship. What has Argentina accomplished in terms of bringing those guilty of crimes during the dictatorship to justice so far?
It is definitely a model. One of the reasons is because Argentina didn't have to implement a special tribunal, special justice system. It's used the structure of the judicial system it already had, the laws it already had. And with that, more than 1,200 people have already been sentenced. Not too many days ago, 12 bodies were identified in central Argentina. And those were the bodies of 12 people that had been disappeared for 50 years. And they were finally identified, and their families could learn their actual fate. The other thing that's been going on for all these years is that babies of pregnant women that were being held captive by the military, when they gave birth, the babies were given away to other families, in many occasions to military families or members of the security forces. These are kids my age. I was born in the same year. I was born in 1976, so it's very close to my heart. And 140 of them had already been found and had been told who they are. The last two in 2025. So this is ongoing. I mean, the effects of what the dictatorship did are still ongoing, and victims are still getting answers.
Some of the trials examining the crimes against humanity during the dictatorship, we hear, are running into roadblocks. What kinds of things have you seen?
The main issue is the pact of silence within the military. Also, currently, the other thing that's going on, people are getting old and they're dying. Perpetrators and victims and witnesses. It's becoming more and more difficult to get actual information to proceed with the trials.
As you said, Natalio, you were born the year of this coup d'etat, 1976. What sorts of stories has your own family passed on to you about that moment and what happened afterwards?
There are a few words that come to mind. One is fear. The other one is silence. The idea that any time something could happen. And the other one is that being quiet was the safest way. And in general, people my age have an image of people on the road being very quiet and careful, and military patrols doing the rounds, and everyone feeling scared that they might be targeted.
And today, for even younger Argentines who did not even live through those years of the military dictatorship, what is at risk with the history of that period now up for debate?
At least the topic is still in the center of the society and is being discussed. And even if things may not be discussed publicly or in the media at certain points in time and in history in Argentina, it's something that's still covered in school, primary and secondary school or high school. Kids and youngsters and teenagers tend to be exposed to what happened between 1976 and 1983. It's not something that's been forgotten, and it's not something that's been erased. So it's still very much there and in the center of what Argentina society tells itself about its past.
Natalio Cosoy is a journalist based in Buenos Aires.
Many European countries are tightening their borders right now, but Spain is doing something different. It is offering working papers to hundreds of thousands of migrants who entered the country illegally. That's in part because Spain needs workers. Most of those migrants are Latinos who speak Spanish, which in theory means one less obstacle for the new arrivals. But in practice, many of these migrants face discrimination based on their accents, also known as glottophobia. The World's Jerry Haddon explains from Barcelona.
The rain in Spain. Everyone knows it falls mainly on the plain, but that's not why I'm bringing it up. It's the word rain itself and how you pronounce it in Spanish. That can vary depending on where you're from, and it can matter. Here's how most Spaniards would say it.
Lluvia.
And now an Argentine.
Lluvia.
Now the two together.
Lluvia. Lluvia.
Hear the difference? It might not sound like a lot, but that little variation between lluvia and lluvia can have a huge impact on a person's life. At least here in Spain, says 67-year-old Argentine Inés Mazote.
Yo digo en argentino, no digo español, porque para mí tampoco.
I always say I speak Argentine, she says. European Spanish is not my mother tongue. For me, she says, hanging on to my accent has helped me maintain my identity. Mazote has lived in Spain since the 1980s. Maintaining her native accent lets her feel rooted in the place she's from, but it's brought her some trouble here.
Estaba conversando con una amiga, o sea que cuando...
One day in Barcelona, I was sitting on my scooter talking to a friend, she recalls, and these Spanish guys overheard my accent. As I was pulling away, they accosted me. They said, "Dirty South American, go back to your country." They started hitting me, she says, and nearly knocked me off my scooter. It was so scary.
A veces, viste, las experiencias negativas en relación a tu
Moments like that, she laments, can awaken in you a kind of hatred you never wanted. It creates a terrible feeling of distrust, she says. Mazote has lots of stories, from Spaniards asking her if she knows how to read, she's a teacher, to a boss who once questioned why she would go to a Spanish music show, implying she lacked culture. Mazote shares her experiences, the small slights and worse, as a cautionary tale for newly arrived Latinos, people who might not be thinking about their accents. After all, for them, they're natural. But for glottophobes, they're a red flag. The term glottophobia dates back to 2008. The guy who coined it, a French linguist named Philippe Blanchet. It comes from glottology, or the study of language.
Alors l'idée, c'est de signifier par ce mot le fait que des personnes sont discriminées.
The idea behind this word, he said, is that people are judged and humiliated. This was Blanchet speaking to French TV a decade ago when his book on the subject came out. People lose self-esteem, he said, when we don't accept the way they speak. Blanchet says glottophobia can trap people in a vicious circle.
Les personnes qui sont marginalisées dans la société, qui sont en gros en bas.
The same people who are marginalized in society, he says, who are basically at the bottom of the scale of social and economic life, are discriminated against even more for the way they speak. And it isn't only migrants who suffer, he says. In many countries, such as France, there's a kind of linguistic dogma that says everyone should have the same accent. Speak like us, it goes, or don't speak at all.
Effectivement, énormément de journalistes à qui on a dit que de toute façon, tant qu'ils n'auront pas...
For example, Blanchet says there are lots of broadcast journalists who are told unless they adopt a sanitized, standardized French, they'll never get to cover serious issues. At best, he says, they can expect to present the weather. In just about every country in the world, you can find these accent hierarchies. How we speak can denote class, education, the region we're from. In Spain, the Minister for Housing, Maria Jesus Montero, has been ruthlessly mocked for her southern Andalus accent. People in the south tend to drop their S's from the ends of words, for example, making them sound, to some ears, unfinished. A glottophobe would dub this way of speaking lazy.
Afortunadamente hemos mejorado, no siempre compartida por parte de la
Things are better, Montero told a TV interviewer recently, but some people, especially conservatives, still equate my region with backwardness and illiteracy. They ridicule our accent, she said, and mimic us. For Latinos in Spain, the consequences can reach beyond mockery, affecting their chances of landing a job, for example. Humberto Cruz is a 51-year-old nationalized Spaniard. He was born and raised in Venezuela and maintains his accent. He says in his 20 years in Spain, he has never been able to rent an apartment.
Me decían que el piso había estado alquilado. No te trataban mal, pero no te daban muchas explicaciones.
When the real estate agents would hear my accent, they'd always say, "Oh, the flat's been rented." But when my Spanish boyfriend would call the same place, he says, they'd immediately set a date for him to visit. This is common, says Cecilia Estrada, a professor of migration studies at Comillas Pontifical University in Madrid.
Hay estudios cualitativos en España que muestran que el acento latino en algunos casos...
There are studies in Spain, she says, that suggest some Spaniards associate Latino accents with lower professional status and menial labor. There's a tendency, she says, to assume that Latinos are less capable. It isn't your classic racism based on biology, she says. It's a more subtle cultural racism. And sometimes not so subtle. Humberto Cruz says he's been yelled at in public after greeting someone with a buenos dias or good morning in his native accent. Get out of my country, an elderly woman once screamed at him on a bus while filming him with her phone.
Yo creo que mucha gente puede llegar a pensar que hemos venido a quitarles.
I think a lot of Spaniards arrive at the conclusion that we are here to steal their jobs, Cruz says, or housing, or to take advantage of the healthcare system, which is already overwhelmed. People fall back on this glottophobia, he says, out of defensiveness. But Cruz, like the Argentine Inés Mazote, says he's not cowed. He says recent arrivals shouldn't be either. Once upon a time, he was just like the hundreds of thousands of Latinos awaiting their first papers. Now he holds a Spanish passport. For The World, I'm Sherry Haddon, Barcelona.
You're listening to The World.
This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. A passing we wanted to recognize. Shigeaki Mori survived the catastrophic bombing of Hiroshima in 1945. He has now died at the age of 88. The U.S. killed tens of thousands of people when the Air Force dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima in the final days of World War II. Shigeaki Mori dedicated much of his life to figuring out the exact number of people, including a group of American POWs who had largely been forgotten. Ibi Caputo brought us Mori's story back in 2018.
You've probably seen Shigeaki Mori. A photo of him hugging President Obama was published around the world after Obama visited Hiroshima in 2016. He spent much of his life trying to get recognition for 12 American airmen who died alongside tens of thousands of Japanese after the atomic bomb was dropped. Shigeaki Mori was just 8 years old when the bomb, known as Little Boy, destroyed Hiroshima. There was no summer vacation back then, so he was on his way to school when the bomb was dropped about 1.5 miles from where he was walking across a bridge. He was blown into the river.
I couldn't even see my fingers enough to count them because it was so dark inside the mushroom cloud.
He doesn't know how much time passed, but eventually he could see well enough to climb out of the river. As he fled, there were people collapsed everywhere in the streets. He was crying.
I was so frantic in trying to escape that I just made my way, stepping on the faces and heads of these people.
Then Mori says it became very cold.
The sun was shut out. There was a fierce shower of black rain. The black rain hit my body. It was very painful.
Mori says his shirt became black and hurt his skin, so he took it off. He was cold, so he wrapped himself in a newspaper at a makeshift shelter. Hiroshima was on fire. All the houses were aflame. It was so bright at night that he could read that newspaper rolled around his body.
After 3 days, I thought I was going to go crazy. Thinking back now, maybe because I had not had a drop of water.
So he left the shelter in search of food. He had heard a rumor that he could get rice balls at his school, but when he got there, all he found was more death.
What I saw was a mountain of dead bodies.
After the war, Mori says people were afraid to talk about what happened that day. But sometimes in the news, numbers would be quoted from the city of Hiroshima's official documents. Mori knew those numbers were wrong. It was recorded that there were 800 dead at the school where Mori had fled that day. But he had witnessed many more bodies than that.
I didn't think the numbers made sense. The number just didn't match.
He's always had a knack for minute details, so in his late 30s, Mori decided he would finally correct the record of how many people actually died in Hiroshima. It was while interviewing fellow survivors that Mori learned about the existence of 12 American POWs. They had been on a mission to bomb Japanese ships when their planes were shot down and they were taken prisoner in Hiroshima. When Mori learned of their stories, he realized no one really knew about them.
I was sure the families all want to know the true story. So I wanted to let them know because they are human beings.
He had found all 12 families and asked for permission to put them in the Memorial Peace Park in Japan.
That's Susan Brissett Archinsky. She's the niece of Norman Brissett, a Navy gunner who was taken prisoner by the Japanese and who died in Hiroshima. Archinsky's 58 and lives near Lowell, Massachusetts, not far from where her uncle grew up. Archinsky says that, growing up, her father didn't talk much about his brother's death, so the family only knew a few basic details. Later on, Archinsky's husband requested Norman's military records. Those records, along with the information Mori provided, helped the family develop a clear picture of what happened.
When the Americans dropped the atomic bomb, there were 12 Americans in the jail. I'm not even really sure that America knew that they were in that jail because there were no prison camps there.
When America dropped the bomb on August 6, 1945, 9 of the American prisoners died immediately. Norman Brissett and one of the other prisoners had been a few blocks away on latrine duty. They jumped into a cesspool, and that saved their life, at least for a little while. They ended up on a truck driven by a Japanese man called Tank. There were other Americans on that truck, including a lieutenant from Massachusetts.
I guess they spoke, and when Norman realized he was from Malden, Mass., he asked him to go see my grandmother when he came back to the States. And he did. So my grandmother was all excited. She thought, well, when is he coming home? And he said, I thought you knew that he's not coming home.
Norman died from radiation sickness 13 days after the bomb was dropped. He was 19 years old. Archinsky's grandmother wrote to the Navy and relayed what she had learned from the lieutenant who had seen her son. Years later, Archinsky's husband bound those letters and Norman's military records into a book and sent them to Maury. Then, in 2015, Archinsky was invited to meet Maury in person as part of a documentary film about the American POWs and Maury's efforts.
And I think I was actually the first family member that actually went to Japan to meet him.
Maury took her on a tour through Hiroshima so she could walk in the footsteps of her uncle. They visited the hospital where he was treated, the place where he was buried before his ashes were repatriated to the United States, and to the military police headquarters where the POWs were jailed. On that building, there is now a plaque commemorating the American victims of the bomb. It reads, "May this humble memorial be a perpetual reminder of the savagery of war." Maury is responsible for that plaque.
He took a second job to pay for the memorial that he had put in Japan for the Americans. It's hard to understand how he can be so loving and peaceful and spend his whole life dedicated to 12 Americans.
Last Memorial Day, Maury and Archinsky met again in Lowell, Massachusetts, when a new monument dedicated to the lost Americans was unveiled there. At the ceremony, Maury and his wife were invited to sing the Japanese national anthem. Shigaki Mori never received any funding in the 4 decades he worked to find out the truth about those who died after the Hiroshima bombing. But he did get to meet the families of the American POWs and also the President of the United States, Barack Obama. He says that was an unexpected and profound reward.
I was emotionally overwhelmed and couldn't stop tears from continuing to flow. Seeing me crying, President Obama reached out his hands to me and pulled me up to him. The president said nothing. I did not say a word, but our hearts were connected.
On that day, Maury knew all his efforts were worth it. For The World, I'm Ibi Caputo.
Ibi Caputo first brought us that story in 2018. Shigaki Mori died on Saturday. He was 88 years old. You're with The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. In 2022, during nationwide protests in Iran, the government there throttled the internet to control information getting out of and into the country. In response, Iranians started preparing a workaround, Starlink. Thousands of satellite terminals were smuggled into the country. When the U.S.-Israeli bombing began in February, the regime again tried to cut its people off from the rest of the world. But some Iranians still found a signal. Dina Temple-Raston has more.
Most of the time, when protests erupt somewhere in the world, most of us can log on and watch for ourselves. Phone videos, live streams, clips that circle the globe within minutes. But when protests erupted across Iran late last year, there was almost nothing to see. No sustained live streams, no steady flow of cell phone videos, no single image you could point to and say, this is what's happening. And into that silence, the government stepped forward with its own version of events, making claims like, we're not shooting at protesters, foreign agitators are.
We have audio recordings of messages sent from outside the country to these terrorist elements, telling them, open fire while you are among the protesters.
The lack of footage wasn't an accident. This is the second time in 3 years Iran has faced nationwide protests. The first time, in 2022, the government didn't shut off the internet completely. Instead, it just slowed it down. Mobile data crawled. We felt that for ourselves when we tried to reach a source in Tehran back then.
Yes, I'm talking. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. This is a young Iranian man we'll call Amin.
Yeah, give me a second. I'm going to do it.
Okay, thank you. Oops, he just left. Back then, the goal wasn't total silence. It was friction. Fast forward to 2026. Iran's internet didn't just degrade this time, it just stopped responding. Phones rang but never connected. Messages stalled mid-send. Which meant the protests that swept across Iran in January were reduced to rumor for anyone outside the country.
Authorities shut down the internet and telephone lines late on Thursday.
Where a total shutdown made it incredibly difficult to establish what was going on.
And then the crisis escalated. Israeli and American airstrikes began in late February, hitting targets across the country. And at that moment, when information mattered most, Iran's network was already flatlining, down to just 1% of normal levels, according to NetBlocks, a global internet monitor. In other words, a country of some 90 million people was suddenly navigating protests, war, and political upheaval almost completely in the dark. And while President Trump called on Iranians to rise up,
I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take.
That's a complicated thing to do when the internet is vanished. Still, with some patience, we managed to find a fragile connection inside Iran. A man in Tehran who agreed to describe what he's seeing around him. For safety, he asked us to use the name Besad.
I have been present at every protest that took place in the last 30 years, both as a protester and later as a social journalist. I try to be a witness to history and document what took place.
Now, as bombs fall across the country, Besad says Iranians are living through a version of events the outside world can barely see.
News strikes across Tehran tonight as the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran is expanding.
What you can observe looking out of the window are places that have been hit at various distances, sometimes smoke or debris, and sometimes clear skies. The majority of people are at home. People are not going out unless they have to, but we are coming up on Nowruz, so people have things to do.
Nowruz is the Persian New Year.
A lot of people are trying to still have some form of normalcy while handling the daily chores. After the recent bombing, I decided to go to work today because we need to earn a living. The economy has to move forward, especially making ends meet.
Reliable information is scarce, which during a war means it's hard to know when airstrikes have happened or where new bombings might occur. Even big news, like the death of Iran's supreme leader, travels really slowly.
Many people spread the word through word of mouth, through phone conversations with relatives and friends. People who had access to satellite networks were getting outside information, but many ordinary citizens had doubts that it had actually happened.
Eventually, state media confirmed it.
Many people whom I talked to after the passing of Khamenei mentioned that they did not celebrate in the way they fantasized about it, mostly because of the degree to which the war is taking place, and also it happened so fast.
So if Iran's internet is essentially gone, how are people communicating at all? To understand that, we turn to this guy.
I am Ahmadian. I'm originally Iranian, and currently I'm living in Los Angeles, and I'm the executive director of Holistic Resilience.
His nonprofit works on ways to keep people connected, even during internet shutdowns. And he says the videos and updates that have made their way out of Iran were made possible by workarounds put in place years ago.
One day of disruption, just, it's a disruption in their life. They cannot bring bread to their tables.
So your point here is it wasn't just activists, it was a whole bunch of people.
Yes.
In places shaped by sanctions and scarcity, people tend to get inventive. When something disappears, they find another way. So when the internet began vanishing back in 2022, many Iranians turned to something else: Starlink. Satellite internet controlled not by Tehran, but by an American company. The government in Iran banned it almost immediately. People caught using it risk arrest, sometimes worse. But that didn't stop demand. Smuggling Starlink terminals quickly became a booming business.
There is a demand in Iran. There is a market building around this. Another shutdown could happen. A lot of people, their lifeline is depending on Starlink.
So you kind of call your electronics guy, and this is just another thing that you ask him for. Is that right?
Exactly, yes.
Over time, the trickle became a pipeline. Researchers estimate thousands of Starlink terminals have made their way into Iran in just the past year. And Ahmad says that by most accounts, many of those connections are still working, even now, during the war. But hiding the hardware that makes this possible is a lot harder. If you think about it, a Wi-Fi router is pretty easy to hide. You can just tuck it into a closet. But a satellite dish, that's different. It has to sit outdoors. It has to face the skies, so it announces itself. So Iranians got creative and learned how to disguise it.
How to hide it as a solar panel, using DIY methods.
They take the satellite dishes and make them look like solar panels, something no one thinks twice about seeing on a roof. Which means something designed to collect sunlight now quietly is collecting signal instead. This is why, when the government tried to shut down the internet during the bloody protests in January, it wasn't entirely successful. And why we're still seeing some images make their way out of Iran now. Ahmad still remembers sitting in his apartment in LA when the first video broke through, proof that the satellite connections were doing what they were supposed to do.
It was a protest in Tehran, in one neighborhood in east of Tehran that was sent by a friend of mine over Telegram, that I saw the videos that massive number of people are in the streets. I mean, I laughed. I had this glorious moment seeing that the Ayatollah was not successful in keeping people in dark.
People cheering from rooftops when the regime confirmed the supreme leader's death. Or a pro-government crowd chanting. Iran is not the only place where images shape the narrative. Earlier this year in Minneapolis, federal agents shot and killed a 37-year-old ICU nurse named Alex Preddy. Officials initially described the situation this way.
This looks like a situation where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement.
But cell phone video began circulating almost immediately.
Are you f***ing kidding me? That guy's dead.
For many viewers, that footage told a more complicated story. Across countries, across political systems, the same pattern keeps repeating. Control the images, and you control the story. Lose that control, and the story may belong to everyone else. For The World, I'm Dina Temple-Raston.
Dina Temple-Raston is the host of Click Here, a podcast and now a public radio show from Recorded Future News and PRX.
In Kenya, a recent law has given some workers the right to request 2 days off per month for menstrual pain. This is only for government workers in Nairobi County and was put forward by the county governor, Johnson Sakaja. National leaders are reportedly keeping an eye on how the policy works out. I caught up with Audrey Mugeni, a women's rights activist based in Nairobi, who outlined the new law.
So when you are on your menses and you are experiencing menses pain, you can ask for leave. There will be 2 days out of a month that you can ask for menstrual pain. So what's really interesting with this particular policy is that you don't need a doctor's note, and you don't even need to explain yourself. At its core, you are keeping your dignity, and it's recognizing that menstruation is a real health experience for many women.
Has there been much public reaction in Nairobi to this policy?
There's been reaction from the public. So it has come in two ways. So one, there's been concerns about employment. Employers are going like, oh, you know what? People are like, they might prefer to hire men because a lot of women will be requiring a lot of extra time. But then one of the reasons is that because it's no questions asked policy, and some people worry that it can be abused. There's also another worry that comes with it is that there's a lot of stigma that even with the policy being in place, there are many women who still feel uncomfortable saying, you know what, I'm on my period, so I want to ask for time off.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really, really big concern. But then the policy so far is a good thing because it leads a precedence in what other employers and what other county governments are supposed to be doing. It's something that can literally be led nationwide.
It sets a precedent, you're saying, and this might spread much farther in Kenya.
Yeah, it might spread much further in Kenya because we are realizing that one of the things that the policy is doing is that it's realizing that women's menstrual health is something that needs to be looked into and that needs to be taken care of. And when we are able to do this, it's one of the things that Sakaja had said, that when we take care of women, then they're able to perform much better at work. And so it would be better for us to support women during this particular time so that they'll be able to, which is something that's true and which is something that we've seen happen in other places around the world. So yes, it's something that can be good. So there've been reactions and they've been both negative and there's been positive ones as well.
That was the governor saying that women will be more productive if they're taken care of, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're saying this is meaningful just because, people are talking about it and are recognizing that period cramps can be pretty debilitating and they're really a part of monthly life for so many people.
Yes. And the policy is acknowledging something that has been ignored for a long time as well. And menstruation does affect women's ability to work, and which should be okay. So if we are letting women take leave, then it's not the end of the conversation. We are letting in people on what is that's happening to women and open the door for much more inclusion. So the thing that might need to happen here is that we might need to now start addressing things like stigma and make sure that the policy does not unintentionally disadvantage other women in the labor market.
So you say those concerns that people have, they're real concerns.
Yeah.
And they both need to be worked on now that women have the legal option to take time if they need it.
Yeah.
So Nairobi is not the first place to pass a law like this. About a half a dozen countries have menstrual leave laws, as well as a handful of provinces in Asia and South America. Menstrual leave in Spain and Japan, at least, which is where I have seen data from, those policies are used by very, very few women. Very few women take this time, even though it's allowed to them. And there's a debate about whether these policies help women or not. Do you have a sense of whether this policy will be effective there in Nairobi County?
I think it's going to be helpful in the sense that one of the things that I'd said is that it's going to start designing workplaces for women instead of us just thinking about men. So yes, it's a 2-day leave policy and you don't have to explain yourself, but then a lot more women are going to take it up because they know that a policy is there. So what I'm saying is yes, it's going to help women. It's going to help women. And I want to say that even as we are helping women, it will take us to the place where that we are not going to be supporting women only in formal spaces, but then we are also going to take us to a point where we are going to be taking care of women who are also working in informal areas, those who are working in rural areas, and those who even have precarious jobs, because these women have not been covered. Right now, it's just the county, but this particular policy will support us in doing that in the country.
As we have touched on, though, that there is stigma around periods.
Yes.
And I can imagine a lot of people all around the world, probably including there, might not want to tell their boss that they are on their period. So that seems like the changing the stigma portion of this is important for its success, as you've said.
Yes, changing the stigma portion is going to be a very important one. One of the things that I have seen happening in Kenya, because my work works a lot around women and girls, there's a lot of talk on period poverty, a lot of talk on how periods are taken by other people around the country and how women are perceived when they're on their periods. There's also the talk of very many girls not attending school because they are on their periods. And I do believe that because the policy has been passed, it's paving a way for us to have conversations on stigma, for us reducing stigma, and for many more people to know what a period is and why it's painful for women when they are on their periods, so they will be able to understand and what they can do for their employers and what they can do for girls even in schools.
Audrey Mugeni, a women's rights activist based in Nairobi. You're with The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Snap elections are happening in Denmark tomorrow. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen called for these elections just last month while riding high on public support, courtesy of her defiant response to President Trump's latest push for a Greenland takeover. Now, just a few weeks later, Frederiksen faces real competition. Adrian Murray reports from Copenhagen.
Velkommen. Giv dem lige en kæmpe stor hånd.
From pit stops at breweries to sweaty sauna sessions, Denmark's election candidates have been hitting the campaign trail with gusto. And with less than a week until the polling stations open, it's a tight race where every vote will count.
This will be a crucial election for us because in the next 4 years, we as Danes and as Europeans will really have to stand on our own 2 feet.
After the country's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, called a snap election, voters must decide whether to give her a third term in office.
We must define our relationship with the US. We must arm ourselves to ensure peace on our continent. We must keep Europe together and we must secure the future of the Commonwealth.
A staunch critic of Russia and supporter of Ukraine, on the international stage, Frederiksen has projected strength as an iron woman from a country of 6 million that punches above its weight. While at home, her waning popularity has been given a Greenland bounce, following her stand against the US president's hostile takeover pitch of the Arctic island.
The Prime Minister's party and the coalition government in Denmark, their opinion polling has been basically slipping since the election 4 years ago. There's been a slight uptick in the aftermath of the latest Trump debacle.
Ulrik Pram-Gall is a senior researcher at the Danish Institute of International Studies.
I think the Prime Minister very much wanted this to be an election on a backdrop of geopolitical upheaval because she likes to present herself as a crisis manager.
Frederiksen's party, the centre-left Social Democrats, now tops public opinion polls with around 21%. But that's well below their score when they won the election in 2022. From pensions reform to pig farming and welfare to water pollution, a diverse roster of domestic issues has dominated debate here in Denmark. And whilst voters may be prepared to put their domestic frustrations on hold for a while, they're not likely to go away. For years, Denmark's Social Democrats seem to have found a magic formula that helped them buck a trend which has seen the voting base erode of one European centre-left party after another. This time, the Social Democrats have pivoted left, proposing a controversial new wealth tax as a sweetener to recapture lost left-wing voters, whilst promising even stricter immigration controls in a pitch to keep the far right at bay. In a packed hall of largely undecided young voters, 9 politicians of all stripes made their pitches. Fredriksson's main challenger is Troels Lund Poulsen, who's both the country's defence minister and leader of the central-right Liberals. But he's trailing in opinion polls and has struggled to find allies among other right-leaning parties, as the left-wing Red Bloc edges ahead. Denmark's second-largest party, the Green Left, could be influential. Handing out food at an event on the campaign trail, leader Pia Olsen Dyr told reporters she's ready to work with the Social Democrats. Meanwhile, the country's foreign minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen, who leads the Moderates, a small party in the political centre, could be a kingmaker. Jarl Cordua is a political commentator.
He will be in government, whatever happens. He's a political chameleon.
With only days until the polls, the Danes will soon decide. Handing victory to Fredriksson will see her become Denmark's longest-serving leader in many decades. But it may take days or even weeks of negotiations before we know what kind of government will take Denmark forward.
That was Inside Europe's Adrienne Murray reporting from Copenhagen.
Folks in Denmark who reject Trump's rhetoric on Greenland aren't just making their positions known at the polls. Danes are also expressing their views when they shop, reserving their purchasing power for goods made outside the states. Shopper Morten Nielsen told the Associated Press that the trick is knowing which products are tied to American companies.
We do boycott, but we don't know all the American goods. So it's mostly the well-known trademarks.
Now there is an app to help people spot the more obscure brands with U.S. connections. Make that multiple apps, and they've seen a surge of interest in Denmark, where they now top the charts in app stores. Take Matometer, created by Ian Rosenfeld last year.
What I found out was that it's actually pretty hard, practically, to do a boycott.
Rosenfeld told the AP he saw an opportunity and built an app that scans barcodes, then uses AI to determine the provenance of an item in a store.
The free app has been downloaded by around 100,000 people in the year it's been around, with a gobsmacking 30,000 of those downloads taking place in the span of a few days in late January.
I was trying to figure out why was this happening, and I found out that, of course, it's because of the provocation by the U.S. in regards to purchasing Greenland, which is really silly, but I think it's very emotional and personal all of a sudden, and people really wanted to do something.
Popular as these apps may be in Denmark, economists say the boycotts are not likely to do a lot because the Danish market for U.S. goods is just not very big. But on the House of L YouTube channel, an influencer known as L points out that the Danish boycott is just one of many actions.
In Canada, shoppers are turning U.S. products upside down on store shelves so other customers can spot and avoid them. Norway stopped supplying fuel to U.S. Navy ships. France is canceling Tesla orders. This is a coordinated, technologically enabled boycott movement.
The people who've developed these apps, by the way, say their products were not intended to encourage a boycott, but to give consumers a choice in their purchases.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. Find us online anytime at theworld.org and check out more of our reporting on YouTube. We are at The World News GBH. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Thank you for listening, and please join us right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Judy Piggott, the Gruber Family Foundation, the Schmidt Family Foundation, and Gavin Salmonese, LLC. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.